Welcome to All Grown Up Now, Tales of a Checkered Past. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is an evolution of the tale, All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts. This is Season 2, and it's called Tales of a Checkered Past. It's a collection of short stories from my salad days on up to the present. In each podcast, another self-contained story will be presented. Enjoy. Episode 93 is a short piece titled No Regrets. Enjoy. Years ago, when I was living in San Francisco, I remember reading an article about exile. Exile in the sense that many of us who moved to San Francisco did so because we couldn't live our lives the way we wanted if we had stayed in the places where we were born. We had no choice. Now, the author said that San Francisco was a lovely exile, beautiful city, accepting of all kinds of people, but it was still exile. Even though I moved to San Francisco to follow a job in my career, not just to be openly gay, that idea of exile stuck with me. There were things one gives up by moving to somewhere else. Familiar friends, family, while one can keep in touch, it's just not the same. There's that thought, what if I had stayed? What would life look like? And was I really in exile? In December of 2021, I took a trip to Oklahoma City. Now, I don't go back often or willingly, as this was a place I couldn't get out of fast enough. But this visit was for a friend. My dear friend Diane, who I've known since college, was having a birthday. As a surprise, her sister Barbara brought me back to Oklahoma City for Diane's party. I flew in on a Friday afternoon and back out on a Monday morning, so it was a short trip. Funny, though, when the plane was landing in Oklahoma City, I had a visceral reaction. Without thinking, I found myself saying to myself, I hate this place. This was the same reaction I had when our moving van pulled up to our new house in Oklahoma City in 1971. While I was there, I looked forward to seeing my sister Kathy as well as surprising Diane for her birthday. Between these visits, I had time to spare, so I decided to go on a stroll down memory lane. In Oklahoma City, though, you don't stroll, you drive. Kathy told me that it takes at least 45 minutes to get anywhere. Since I hadn't lived there for 40 years, the place had grown considerably. It was now foreign territory. I had to cheat and use the GPS to navigate my trip down memory lane. The first stop on this trip was to visit the Dillard store in the Quail Springs Mall. This was the place where I met and worked for Mark all those years ago. For those who haven't heard the story, I was one of the people who opened that store in October of 1980. When Mark left, I became the display manager on February of 1981. Mark ended up getting a job in San Francisco. He hired me as his assistant, and that is how I escaped. When this store opened in October of 1980, it was stylish, a nice-looking store. Lots of light oak parquet floors, lots of mirrors on the columns and walls, carpeting in the colors of the time, dusty rose, burnt orange, burgundy, and dusty pink in the ladies' areas, putty gray in the men's department. Plenty of displays. Everything was up to date for a retail store in 1980. I had lots of memories of opening this store and working there. It was, at the time, the largest department store in Oklahoma City. When I was made the display manager at age 23, it was quite an accomplishment. I had arrived. Life was good salary, inexpensive rent, and essentially, I was my own boss. I understood, though, that this was as far as I could go in Oklahoma City. The next step was out. Dallas was the next stop for any upwardly mobile gay boy, and I worked towards getting a transfer there with Dillard's. However, fate stepped in. This was Mark, now living in San Francisco. I interviewed for the job as his assistant in July of 1981, and in August, they hired me. And I got the hell out of Oklahoma City as fast as my car could take me. So, in other words, I hadn't laid eyes on this store since 1981. I pulled up to the store right about opening time. Strange. It looked exactly the same as it did in 1980. But outside architecture is difficult to change, so I got out of the car and went inside. Once I stepped through the doors, it was like going into a parallel universe. The store, or rather the architecture of the store, looked largely unchanged. I walked the aisles, amazed at what was still there and what was gone. Gone were any attempts at display. I only saw 6 headless mannequins in the juniors department, which had been moved from its original location and now occupied the former designer clothing corner. The remainder of the Missy's floor looked pretty much the same. Same racks, only more of them. Same walls, same carpets. Really. 40-year-old carpets. But completely barren of display. The oak parquet flooring was still there, looking for all the world like it had been refinished with a cheese grater. One of the salespeople told me that the manager had hired the stock boys to run a sander over all of it and slap down some varnish. And it looked like it. Up and down the aisles I walked, first the upper floor, then the lower floor. On the main aisle in the linen department, where there used to be a bed display, was a jumble of merchandise thrown against the wall. The display and the platform were long gone, but there was a hole in the wall that I had made in 1981.
No way.
Meaning, it hadn't been spackled over for painting since 1981. Overall, the place looked the same, and I was sad. This place had frozen in time, and not in a good way. Everywhere I looked, there were things I remember installing, maintaining, and moving. Stuck in time, unloved, ignored. It was all too sad. As I got to the door, I took one last look back, knowing I wouldn't be visiting again. No regrets. My next stop was to visit my very first apartment. When I graduated from college on May 5th, 1980, I'd planned to move out on my own. So, on the morning of May 6th, I went to a place called Apartment Locators, looking for a place for $100 a month. And I found it, a tiny little place in my landlady's backyard. It was in a little grouping of duplexes that my landlady, Mrs. Freeman, had built up before the city had expanded that far north. The city grew up around them except for the golf course. That was on the other side of our fence. This little building in Mrs. Freeman's backyard was 2 units, or what we would call a duplex in Oklahoma. Now, this was a mini duplex, and it fit in a small parcel of her backyard. This was accessed through an opening in the wood fence in the back of Mrs. Freeman's backyard. There was a small 1-bedroom unit and a studio. The studio was what I rented. There was a nice little lawn out front and a small table with 2 chairs. Sweet. I've talked about Mrs. Freeman before. She was a feisty 88-year-old Ruth Gordon type character. Living there was like having a cool grandma and living in her backyard. I adored her. This place was tiny. The big room was the width of the length of a twin bed, and it was as deep as 1.5 twin beds. I could touch the ceiling while standing flat-footed. As I said, tiny. The kitchen was slightly smaller and had the closet in there as well. But what sold me on this tiny place, aside from the price, was the bathroom window. It was one of the sample windows you see when you go to the building supply place and order your windows to measure. This one measured 10 inches wide by 18 inches high. It had a little sash and a little window screen, just like the grown-up windows did. It was the perfect scale for the bathroom, which looked like an airplane bathroom that had a shower stall. After I moved in, I installed a clear shower curtain just to make the damn thing look a little larger. Miss Ann remarked when she came over to see it that someone could see you in the shower. I remarked that if someone were in there when I was showering, it would be because I wanted them to see me. That shut the conversation down. So, pulling up to the place that morning, I was happy that it looked just as I remembered. It just so happened that my old parking space was open, so I pulled the car right in and looked out the windshield. I could see the little walkway that led back to my place, so I got out. Walking down the little walkway to Mrs. Freeman's backyard was a little bit of déjà vu. I thought of the first time I had walked down this path when I rented the place back in 1980. Good times. Then I opened the gate to Mrs. Freeman's backyard. What I remembered, what I expected to see, was Mrs. Freeman's backyard. She was an avid gardener and had lush grass. The perimeter of the yard was flower beds planted with flowering bushes. There was a little walkway bisecting the yard with a round brick planter in the middle that was planted with rose bushes. But Mrs. Freeman was long gone, as were her efforts to make a beautiful garden. In its place was a barren, desolate, wind-swept yard, the bushes and other plants long gone. There wasn't even any evidence of grass, just barren dirt. The brick planter was a hollowed-out shell. Even the brick borders of her flower beds were broken up in places. I walked through the yard to the opening in the fence where my apartment was. On the way, I could see the little bathroom window on the side of the building, but it was blocked with aluminum foil. The paint on the building was faded and peeling. It was obvious this little building hadn't had any love for quite a long time. Through the opening in the fence, I saw what was once my front yard. It was replaced by gravel, and there were 2 trucks parked in front. These trucks had signs painted on the sides, some construction company. The golf course on the other side of the fence was gone. Houses now occupied the land. Looking over at the front of the little duplex, there was more aluminum foil on the windows, more peeling paint, and dirt. I think they may have converted the building into storage for the construction company. I don't know. I stood in front of the building, reminiscing, taking some photos, and feeling sad for the turn this place had taken. It was all barren, deserted, and forlorn. I took one last look, turned, and left. Again, no regrets. My last stop on the nostalgia tour was to visit the house we moved into when we arrived in Oklahoma City. It still stands. The neighborhood is still solidly middle class. The house is still well maintained. I just looked at it from the car. As I've said before, I can't summon up even one good memory of that place. In my mind, The house was cursed. I hope the people who live there now aren't haunted by this curse. I wish them a better life and memories in that house than I had. That evening, I attended the party for my friend Diane. It was great to get to surprise her like that. We've known each other since 1977 when we met in Frau Dr. Schneider's German class. Diane has a nice life with a lively and close circle of family and friends. I also got to see my sister Kathy and spend some time with her and get to see her new house. That said, I was deeply grateful to get on the plane to come home. The feelings from the trip stayed with me, and I understood that I needed to sort them out, so lots of journaling was involved. Seeing the places where I spent the salad days of my life, looking sad and decrepit, cemented in my mind that moving away was the best thing I did. While my sister and my friend Diane carved out good lives there, I understood that if I had stayed, I would have turned into a version of the Dillard store, outwardly the same, little changed, worse for the wear, fundamentally stuck in the time and place of 1980. The little apartment was a fond memory of that time. It represented freedom. I was young, frisky, pretty, stylish, and it was my home base. I even remember the evening while sitting at the little table in front, reading my mail and sipping Perrier, that I realized that those would be my good old days. But I knew even then that it wouldn't last forever. Seeing the place, sad, neglected, stuck in time, confirmed that. It looked like what I imagined I would look like if I had stayed there. So this little trip helped me to summon up a big helping of gratitude and no regrets. So back to the idea of exile that I mentioned earlier. Some people have regrets when they're in exile. Regrets of the life and people that came before. Exile can be forced or voluntary, and I think that makes a difference. Perhaps the writer of that article felt he had no choice but to move to San Francisco from his place of origin, and therefore the exile felt bittersweet, that there was something that was left behind. But for me, it was a voluntary exile. I was going towards something, not running away from something. In the past, people assumed I moved to San Francisco from Oklahoma to be gay, but that wasn't the case. What I wanted out of life wasn't available in Oklahoma. If I had stayed there, it would have been very easy for life to stop in its tracks, for me to stay in one place. Then my life might have looked like the Dillard store in my first apartment. Shadows of what was, sad and shabby. This visit helped me see that. So, was it really exile for me? I don't think so. I voluntarily left, understanding what I left wouldn't stay the same, but I would had I remained. So, I have no regrets, just gratitude. Thanks for listening. You can get the audiobook All Grown Up Now on iTunes, Audible, and Amazon, or from my website, allgrownupnow.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have any questions, you can reach me through the website, allgrownupnow.com. Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design or on my main website, KennethDKing.com.